Long days, pleasant nights, and welcome to Kingslingers, a Doof media podcast journeying through Stephen King's Dark Tower series and beyond. I am your host, constant reader Scott Daly, and I'm writing you from the desk in my brand new family home, which probably does not have dead people in the walls.
And I'm King Newbie Matt Freeman, one of the dead people in the walls. And I'll have one for the road.
This week on the show, we are going to be checking out two Stephen King short stories set in Salem's Lot, quote unquote. We're going to be talking about Jerusalem's Lot and One for the Road. This was not originally our plan. We were just going to head right into the next book after this, but we decided we should take a quick stop and check out these two short stories. So that's what we're going to be doing this week, Matt. What did you think of both of these stories broadly before we dive into them?
Well, I was really happy to flesh out the SLEU.
I'm sorry, the what?
The Salem's Lot Expanded Universe.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I feel like I learned a lot about Stephen King from these stories.
Interesting. Okay.
I liked just in terms of just very high level. Like I enjoyed Jerusalem's Lot a lot. We'll talk about how it's clearly a Lovecraft homage.
Mm-hmm.
And then the second one, One for the Road, just it seemed like he had one more fun idea in the Salem's Lot setting that could have very well fit into the book, and it just was like, yeah, this is fine.
Yeah, it could have been a fun stinger at the end of the book. Yeah,
fun stinger, exactly. It was like a fun little end note. Felt it's totally. I think one fun thing is that these are two totally stylistically different stories.
Yeah, I think it's fun to have to talk about them in the same week because they are so incredibly different from each other. Yeah,
that really shows his range, and I think it shows a lot of the things that we've noticed over and over, like the things that he likes to do in storytelling.
Sure. Yeah, I enjoy these stories too. I think, as I said at the beginning, we didn't originally have them on the schedule, and I think it's because I wasn't sure that I had enough to say about them for a full episode. So it is possible that this episode might be a little bit shorter. We obviously are going to discuss the stories in as much detail as we can, but I don't know. I neither of these stories, the first time I read them, impacted me a lot. I don't think I would list them if you were asking me for like a top 5 Stephen King short story list. I don't think either of them would come close to that list, actually. So I don't know. They're enjoyable stories. I'm looking forward to this conversation, but definitely not, in my opinion, the best example of Stephen King short fiction.
Yeah, I haven't read that many of them, but just as short stories, they I didn't think about them all day like you like you might think about a short story that was perfectly crafted and sticks.
Sure, yeah. All right. Before we dive into discussing these stories in a little bit more detail, just some quick announcements. As far as our schedule is going, I think the last time we talked about the schedule, I said we were going to be diving into the Dark Tower comic books before we started with Insomnia. And I have finished reading the first of the Dark Tower comic books, and I enjoyed it, but we're going to hold off on discussing those for now, just because I think I need to get my head around exactly how I want to do those episodes, because I think it's not going to quite work under our traditional format. And I just need some more time to kind of figure out how I want to approach these things. So I'm going to give myself that more time by having us just begin with Insomnia as soon as we wrap up our last Salem's Lot episode, which will be next week when we cover the movie/TV miniseries. And then so that's the way it's going to work. The updated schedule is there in the show notes of this episode and every single episode. If you're curious about when we're reading what and where and when, it's all there. But that is the plan.
Sounds good. I've been looking forward to reading Insomnia.
It's gonna be a good one. A book that has no adaptation, by the way.
Oh, thank God.
One of the few Stephen King books that do not have any adaptations, unless you want to count the Christopher Nolan movie, which you shouldn't, because it's not even close to what that book is about.
Not even close.
Not even close.
I will say that this is the one book where I have no idea what this book is about. I just know that some maybe other level of the Tower version of the kid who shows up at the end of the Dark Tower.
Yeah, you can't even think of his name now. Patrick.
Patrick Danville.
Yes.
And that's it. That's
I think at the end of next week's episode, I want to spend a few minutes just getting you to put into audio everything you think this book is going to be about before you read a page, because I think that's going to be a lot of fun. Because
that'll be fun.
I mean, thinking in my head of what you could possibly know about the story, it's not a lot. Yeah.
One final announcement. This Friday, that is August 6th, we will be doing our monthly book club. This month, the book is The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet, which, it's funny, this is a book that I've heard recommended from like 6 different angles. So apparently it's just very hot right now. And I'm halfway through it. I'm enjoying it. And I can't wait to talk about it.
Yeah, so we will be over on our YouTube page at 9:30 p.m. Central Time, spending a couple hours talking about this book. So if you want to come hang out and discuss this book, we really recommend it. It's a pretty quick read. If you're listening to this on Thursday, I don't know if it's a day turnaround kind of quick read, but perhaps you've read the book before and want to join us to chat about it.
Yeah.
All right, let's move into the discussion. And Matt, let's begin with the prequel. Let's begin with Jerusalem's Lot. You know it's serious because it's the full name.
Yeah.
So Jerusalem's Lot was first published in the 1978 short story collection Night Shift, which is King's first of many, many short story collections. I think he's got like 5 or more. I'm not even sure on that. Many of these stories were published elsewhere before coming to this collection, but Jerusalem's Lot, the one that opens the book, was not. So this is the first time it was in print, and it was the first place to see this particular story.
That's cool. I think it's interesting to talk about the fact that, like, even this early into his career, King was already exploring the idea of publishing connected stories, you know, with a connected cosmos.
Sure.
And I think it's especially clear from this particular story that he's taking a page out of Lovecraft's book in terms of dictating how he's going about that. Because obviously Lovecraft had the whole Cthulhu mythos. Everything was connected in a cosmology. King obviously loves that. And I mean, this is, if anything, linking the Cthulhu mythos into the Dark Tower mythos because, well, we'll get there.
Yeah. And this is an interesting thing because I think it's a great way to start the conversation, because this story takes place in the year 1850. It's roughly 125 years before the events of the novel we just finished reading. And it's not exactly clear that the Jerusalem's Lot that exists in this story is the same place as the Salem's Lot that took place in the novel we read. It's not that anything in the story like directly contradicts the history of Jerusalem's Lot as it's told in Salem's Lot, but it doesn't exactly like jive with it either. So it's not definite, but it's definitely not like clear.
Yeah, I mean, so there's definitely some points in there. So like at best you can assume that Jerusalem's Lot was a town that existed that was then overtaken by undead Yog-Sothoth worshippers in the 1850s or whatever, and then reestablished at a later date only to then be massacred by vampires. So it becomes kind of convoluted. And then there's like the detail that I wasn't clear on is like, wait a minute, what was the vintage of the pig Jerusalem that escaped and became the namesake of the lot? Because it must be before 1850.
Yeah, so in Salem's Lot, they said the town was incorporated in the 1700s, which doesn't quite drive with this because they refer to it as a village in this. Like it's a small abandoned village by the people of Preacher's Corner, which is again another place that seemingly has never been mentioned or referred to at all in the Salem's Lot novel. So I mean, I think it's the easiest thing to say. It's just that these are on different levels of the tower, right? We can just always throw that at anything, any inconsistencies we come across. But I mean, it's interesting to me because it seems like, because the story didn't come out till 1978, even if he maybe originally wrote the draft of the story prior to writing Salem's Lot, he published it after that book had come out. So he didn't want to make it clear that this was or was not the same place. Like there would be, if he wanted to make it clear that it was or was not, there would be very easy ways to do that. And he chooses not to.
Yeah, that's a good point, because there's all sorts of ways. I mean, he doesn't shy away from being referential, generally speaking. Yeah. There's all sorts of ways that he could have made it clear. Like he could have used other people's names, right? He could have been like, the people in Preacher's Corner could have had names like, you know, Marston, or wait, that
Yeah.
one doesn't work so much, but you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah. We could have peppered it with names of characters that we would recognize from Salem's Lot.
right.
I mean, there's tons of things. Yeah, you're like the name Boone does not appear in Salem's Lot at all.
The name Boone does, yeah. So it's just weirdly disjoint, and it's like the only thing that's actually in common between the two is the name of the town or is Lot.
Mm-hmm.
Which is it's not like we're criticizing. It's just an interesting and kind of curious choice.
I kind of like the mystery of it. I think it enhances it to me because like whether or not you shove it away as another level of the tower or what have you, it just makes it seem a little bit more otherworldly. Like you can never really, the fact that there's very little that you can like get a grip on in the story, I think enhances that Lovecraftian feel to it for sure.
Yeah. Right. And I think maybe it would have felt a little bit much if he had just been kind of like slathering on the overt references to Salem's Lot.
Sure.
Maybe that would have come off poorly. So maybe it's better that he did it this way.
Yeah, I think you're right. But this story, our story here, begins itself by kind of declaring itself, unlike Carrie and unlike the brief moments in Salem's Lot, this is a true epistolary story. This is every bit of this is written in a letter or a journal entry from one of our characters. And I'm curious, Matt, how this style, like the full committed epistolary style worked on you here, Matt. King is obviously really channeling something different, something out of his norm with this story.
Yeah, I mean, I immediately identified it as a Lovecraft homage or I mean, really just kind of Lovecraft fanfic, if you will. I mean, because
sure,
I don't have a problem with it, but he even makes it clear that Yog-Sothoth, the central Lovecraft evil deity, is in this story.
Mm-hmm.
But one thing I do like is like, okay, I think he executes it really well, and I think he does a great job merging a lot of the stylistic conceits that Lovecraft employed in his stories with some of the more modern storytelling, pacing, and characterization, and structural, idioms that we use now.
Sure.
So like, it manages to feel fast paced and exciting and, just well written by every metric, even though it is, using this sort of archaic mode that you typically don't see anymore.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I think especially since I just kind of came off of reading Dracula again, which is very much in the same style as the story. It's 100% epistolary. Dracula is not an homage. It is just existing in the time, not the exact same time, but close enough. And I do think it's interesting the ways in which sometimes the writing of that is a struggle to read because of the time it was set in. King manages to capture that feel without the sometimes struggle I had with the way the characters talk. That is a little bit dated to our modern ears and eyes. I think you're absolutely right that he manages to like Charles Boone talks like a guy that you can believe existed in 1850, but in a manner that is easy for us to read.
And a lot of the stuff that I remember from Lovecraft is just that he tends to go on tangents that aren't particularly interesting or doing anything that is valuable to the core of the storytelling.
Hey, that fits well with Mr. Stephen King.
Yeah, but when King does it, I like it, is the difference.
Well, yeah, I think he's a better writer, but that's okay. So our protagonist in the story is a man named Charles Boone. He's recently taken up residence as his old ancestral home named Chapelwaite, which is it's a delicious name for an incredibly sinister house.
Yes, it is.
I love
absolutely
it so much.
Perfect.
This is just a fun fact for you and maybe some of our listeners that don't know. They are going to make an adaptation of this short story into a television series called Chapelwaite. It's starring Adrian Brody, and I believe it's going to be on the Epix channel, subscription channel. I'm so exhausted by how many different subscription channels there are. I really would love to see this thing. A trailer of it recently came out, and it looks incredible. But I'm not going to get a new streaming service.
I mean, Adrian Brody does sound like the perfect person for this story. So
yes,
that's great.
I really liked this description of the house here. It sits atop a huge and jutting point of land, perhaps 3 miles north of Falmouth and 9 miles north of Portland. Behind it are some 4 acres of grounds gone back to the wild in the most formidable manner imaginable. Junipers, scrub vines, bushes, and various forms of creepy climb wildly creeper climb wildly over the picturesque stone walls that separate the estate from the town domain. Awful imitations of Greek statuary peer blindly through the rack from atop various hillocks. They seem, in most cases, about to lunge at the passerbyers. My cousin Stephen's tastes seem to have run the gamut from the unacceptable to the downright horrific. So once again, in the Salem's Lot style, we have a house sitting on top of a hill, or in this case, probably more pronounced jutting point of land. But I think it's important to say here, again, in our kind of confusion of where this place is, this is not the Marston house, right? Like you would almost think, oh, maybe this was the original name of the Marston house and it got changed when Mr. Marston moved into it. But no, this is Chapelwaite and the Marston house are not the same thing. But they have a similar evil around them.
Yeah, I definitely had the same thought that I was like, oh, is this the Marston house? And there are a few clues like, wait, I don't think you can see the Atlantic from the Marston house.
No, no.
And also then eventually you realize like, no, Salem's Lot is way far away from this and nothing really adds up. But yeah, it's a similar concept where it's like the evil in this case literally resides in the house. And it's super, super creepy and effective. I love it.
Yeah, I love the description of the house. I love, and I mean, we'll get to this a little bit more, but I love the ways in which, Charles Boone is such a wonderful character because, and I think this is where the epistolary form really serves the story. It's because like he's so hesitant to put his actual fear and concerns into a letter because he doesn't want to seem crazy. And so it allows like the fun thing about epistolary stories, I think, is the reader having to fill the dots in between the letters and what's actually going on versus what the characters are willing to put down on paper is going on. And I think it's just really fun.
Yeah. And just like the ability to really express character through the writing, because you're like, he's literally writing this to his dear friend Bones, who also, it's funny because you're like, never explained why his friend is called Bones or any of that. It's just, that's just a fun little like indication that they have a great history between them. But I love that. I love how it's used. There,
in a later letter, we see Charles notes that his servant Calvin has kind of been to town and heard whisperings that from people in the little town of Preacher's Corner that anyone who would live in this house of Chapelwaite must be crazy. And just like what we were talking about, I think this is a really fun part where like Charles is kind of like, oh, isn't that silly? But in the background, we reading a story like feel the ominousness of this because like this is a place like the entire town is like, you got to be fucking nuts to be in this place. What are you doing? And it's like, oh, aren't the locals so quaint in their silly superstitions?
Well, also you're like, okay, but you're including that in the letter, so obviously it's kind of preying on your mind. Otherwise, you wouldn't be writing about it. And I mean, it's a fun part of the conceit of like stories told through letters is like, oh my pen has really run away with me. It's like as if you're just like writing stream of consciousness or something. But it's you just accept it. It's part of the subgenre.
Sure.
I mean, I think I also like the way that he number one, he takes his time in building up the ominousness and dread of things. We don't rush into it, and I like the way that he employs Cal as a character here. For me, there were actually moments where I was suspicious of Cal.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, I feel like if this were a Lovecraft story, then Cal would totally turn out to be like one of the bad guys who had like lured our narrator here and was steepling his fingers while our narrator gets eaten by zombies. But but actually, I think here King's sensibility trumps Lovecraft's nihilistic impulse, and we end up with a little quartet actually.
Yeah, I think Calvin is a great character who is intensely loyal to Charles and suffers the consequence for it, actually.
Yeah, right.
Charles next tells in his next letter of his servant Cal discovering this map hidden in the bookshelf. That he finds this after hearing these spooky thumping noises from behind the walls, which is a recurring beat that only escalates throughout the story. The map is of a small town called Jerusalem's Lot, so that's the first time we see Jerusalem's Lot. And on the front, it's marked with an ominous sentence, "The worm that doth corrupt." And I'm wondering if it, like you said you were kind of clued into this being a Lovecraftian story. Had you gotten there already, or were you still kind of thinking vampires?
Let's see. What did I think at that point? I mean, I thought that there was going to be some other generically evil alien presence. I thought this was going to be more of like, we're going to understand what the nature of the evil of the Marston house was. That's more what I was thinking.
Okay.
And I wouldn't have been shocked to find a vampire in the story, but I wasn't expecting it to be vampires specifically. And I mean, frankly, like, it just seemed like we were doing a bunch of other stuff that obviously had nothing to do with vampires. Like,
that's
okay,
fair.
There's something in the walls that's going to turn out to be a thing. I don't think that's vampires. And I mean, I didn't. It's funny is I identified it as an homage to the Cthulhu mythos, but I didn't actually expect Yog Sothoth to be in the story. So I guess I probably could have guessed, but
yeah. So the question, I mean, did this story spook you out at all? I mean, I think this is one of actually his spookier stories.
Sure. Yeah. I thought the mystery of what are the things inside the walls, I thought was genuinely spooky. When they go into the actual town of Salem's Lot and it's like perfectly preserved, but empty. I thought that was genuinely spooky. Certain parts of it, I think, maybe didn't affect me as much as he, maybe wanted them to, and that's it's fine. I think some things just don't work on everyone.
Sure.
I liked a lot of the stuff where it's like around the edges that causes you to ask questions like, oh yes, my ancestor, his daughter died in an unfortunate accident on the basement stairs, and then he took his own life, and you're like, okay, some shit went down there. Like that's not the full story, obviously.
Yeah.
And you're probably gonna find out more of the context. So he's really good at throwing you little things where you're like, okay, we're gradually filling in the edges of this picture of what was really going on here, what really happened in the past, what's the meaning of all of this. And like also I love the way it's like all of these things are clearly bothering the protagonist, and that's why he's writing about them. But also he's like, yes, it's the silliness of these townsfolk. So there's that tension there.
He has such a consistent, like, even I think really up until the moment where he just loses his shit, when I think the first time he sees his relatives in the walls. Yeah. Like he manages to maintain this like stiff upper lip Englishness about him that is just kind of absurd. But yeah, I mean, like his true nature is coming through, like his curiosity and his concern. I actually love that, like, the first time we see the word Jerusalem's Lot is not when they find the map. It's actually a letter that Charles is writing to a friend of his to get more information about the town called Jerusalem's Lot. And we don't even actually find out why he's asking about this until the next letter, where he tells the story of Cal finding the map. I think that's a really interesting choice, because it shows his inquisitive nature. Like it's almost like in the order of operations, the first thing he did when he found the map was write this letter first to find more information about the town, and then he went and wrote this letter kind of explaining what went down with finding the town and then visiting the town and all this other stuff.
Yeah, I think you're right. I agree. Yeah, that comes across.
Mm-hmm. Just a fun note here that Bram Stoker also wrote a novel called The Lair of the White Worm. I've never read it. I don't know what it's about, and I don't think it is a direct comparison to the events of this story, the way that Salem's Lot is to Dracula. But I think it's a fun connection nonetheless. We have a Bram Stoker novel that is directly referencing Salem's Lot, and perhaps just via the worm of the title here is referenced in this.
Yeah, that's very fun. That's cool. I didn't know about that.
So the next morning, Cal and Charles set out to explore the abandoned town of Salem's Lot, because why not? You find a creepy map mentioning a worm, and why not go explore that place? Would you go explore the place?
Oh, totally. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I don't think I would be able to not. I think curiosity is a really interesting thing in this regard. And it's like, here's this weird map, and then people in town are saying, are pretending that place doesn't exist, and I got to check it out.
Yeah, I mean, if there's a a weird supernatural legend about a place that's within walking distance of me, I'm definitely going to go check it out.
Here's our first description of Jerusalem's Lot. The stream was perhaps 8 feet across, spanned by a moss-grown footbridge. On the far side, Bones, stood the most perfect little village you might imagine, understandably weathered, but amazingly preserved. Several houses, done in that austere yet commanding form for which the Puritans were justly famous, stood clustered near the steeply sheared bank. Further beyond, along a weed-grown thoroughfare, stood 3 or 4 of what might have been primitive business establishments, and beyond that, the spire of the church marked the map, rising up to the gray sky and looking grim beyond description, with its peeled paint and tarnished, leaning cross. "The town is well named," Cal said softly beside me.
Which is a fun beat because they don't know that Jerusalem's Lot has nothing to do with Jerusalem.
Yeah,
but that's fine. That's just funny.
Yeah,
I've I love that passage you just read, and I've been thinking a lot recently, and maybe talked about it a bit on the show before, about how little I care for most descriptive writing from most authors, and how most of the time my eyes just glaze over and I like skim descriptive writing, because it just doesn't matter. Like you're just like, yeah, whatever, it doesn't matter. But like King just does it right. Like, and I think what it is, specifically, like in this passage specifically, is he's made you suitably curious about what you're going to find at the town. And then when he describes it, you're getting the answer to a question that you've had, and you're like, okay, good. Like this is information I wanted, right?
Sure.
And I think it's not like that's the only rule of thumb that he follows when he's doing descriptive writing. But I think usually if he's going to give you a lengthy description of something, it's like, yes, I was wondering what this actually looked like because I was curious about it. It's not just like, some random house and he's going to have a lengthy description of what the house looks like. And it doesn't matter because it's not a house that you care about. And the classic thing of like George R. R. Martin describing all of the dresses and heraldry. It's like, I don't care.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's part of the mystery. It's part of the story. And it kind of causes you to have more questions because like you find this map. The map has a town on it that you've never heard of and no one seems to acknowledge. You go check out the town and it's weathered, as he said, understandably weathered, but amazingly preserved. And so the solving of mystery of what is Jerusalem's Lot opens up another mystery of why is this place abandoned? Why are there no people here? Well, and part of understanding that is seeing how eerily like towny it still is. It still looks like a place where people would live.
Yeah. I mean, and it's a thing. I remember saying something about this, something similar to this in a Salem's Lot discussion, but just the idea that like the house or the town is sort of undead right now. Like it has the appearance of life, but it is in fact dead. Just like, just like an undead thing. And no, this is not a vampire story, but there are notes of undeath for sure.
It's interesting because in Salem's Lot, it was the Marston house that was kind of the core of the evil, right? And in this, it seems to be our church, right? The church is the center of the town, and it's the church, which is extremely ominous. Like I love this paragraph here. It reared above us, grim, uninviting, cold. Its windows were black with the shadows inside, and any godliness or sanctity had departed from it long ago. Of that, I am certain. We mounted the steps, and I placed my hand on the large iron door pull. A set, dark look passed from myself to Calvin and back again. I opened the portal. How long since that door had been touched? I would say with confidence that mine was the first in 50 years, perhaps longer. Rust-clogged hinges screamed as I opened it. The smell of rot and decay which smote us was nearly palpable. Cal made a gagging sound in his throat and twisted his head involuntarily for clearer air. I love that passage so much, Matt. Like I love the idea of that it becomes a portal, right? I opened the portal. He's going to somewhere. Yeah. He's going somewhere else.
We do sort of go into a supernatural realm, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And of course, in this church, there's an upside down cross and then the altar in the center. And in the center is a copy of The Mysteries of the Worm, a book that Charles touches and almost faints. And when he does touch it, he hears a macabre turning beneath his feet, which is, I just love that expression, a macabre turning. It's so good.
Yeah, it's funny. His words like macabre and tenebrous are big Lovecraft flags, I think. And it might come off as purple, except I think it works great here because in the epistolary style, you're hearing it from the voice of this character, and you can believe that the character would use those words.
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting cheat to get to use overly flowery, unrealistic language. It's like, well, it's not me, the author, saying this. It's Charles Boone. This is the way Charles Boone talks. I love that.
Right.
So they flee the church and make their way home. And then I love this here. This is, again, an advantage of the epistolary style that King is using here, because the next letter we see is from Calvin McCann, and it says, "Dear gentlemen, in the most recent edition of your catalog of household items, i.e. summer 1850, I noticed a preparation which is titled Ratsbane. I should like to purchase one 5-pound tin of this preparation at your stated price of 30 cents. I enclose return postage. Please mail to Calvin McCann, Chapelwaite, Preacher's Corners, Cumberland County, Maine. Thank you for your attention in this matter. I remain, dear gentleman, Calvin McCann." I love this stuff so much, Matt, and this is kind of falling into what we already talked about here, but this sets the scene for the next letter, in which Charles will say to Bones, "The noises within our walls have gotten much, much louder," but it does such in such a fun way. It's again, like reading between the lines here. You just say, "Oh, the rat problem that they've had has gotten considerably worse," and so now Calvin is like desperately searching for remedies to this problem they're having.
Exactly. Yeah, right. And you're beginning to suspect, like I think in the beginning of the story, I was thinking like, yeah, maybe it's just big rats. Like that would be creepy. We sort of already have this rat connection from Salem's Lot, actually.
Yeah.
And then when it's like, when they start getting like much louder and you hear like shuffling and maybe voices, you're like, okay, it's not rats.
Definitely not rats. Yeah. So Charles then heads into the town of Preacher's Corner for the first time, because they still haven't gotten their delivery of wood for the winter. So he heads to Preacher's Corner to kind of figure out where the cords of wood he ordered are. And he heads to the woodcutter's place, and they're immediately like screamed at for being a boon and kicked out of the place. And this is once again like really laying the ominousness on thick, right? Like everyone in this town wants nothing to do with them, and in fact chase them off. And I think later we see that Calvin gets like stoned, right? Like they throw rocks at him when he tries to go in town for being associated with Chapelwaite. Yeah,
right. And I also like, this is the first time we directly see the town, and I mean, I actually sort of got an impression like Cal has kind of sugar-coated things for our narrator, because it's like, holy shit, this is a terrible town. Actually, like it seems to be suffering from like this sort of curse of I guess the boons or whatever you want to say.
Yeah, I mean, we find this a little bit more where he goes and Charles goes and talks to the cleaning woman that's been cleaning their house, and she is kind enough to not scream him away immediately, but says, "Hey, you need to leave because since you came back, evil omens have been happening. In the last week, since you set foot in that accursed place, there have been omens and portents, a call over the face of the moon, flocks of whippoorwills which roost in the cemeteries, an unnatural birth. You must leave." It's just like, yeah, you're right. We get our first window into, oh wait, yeah, things are way worse than we thought.
Yeah, I love this character, the woman who is clearly like more educated and more rational than you kind of expect her to be, and she's like, look, like I'm speaking to you about things that sound crazy, but I'm going to try to explain this to you as clearly and rationally as possible. You need to get the hell out of here. And I don't know, you kind of love her. She kind of strikes me as a good King character.
Yeah, I mean, like, she, out of anyone in this town, is the only one willing to do any measure of kindness towards this guy who has no idea what he's getting himself into. Like, everyone else is just dismissive. She is loyal. She cleans the house, and she's trying to help him, and he just won't listen.
Yeah, right. I love the evil flocks of whippoorwills that kind of become more and more prominent. It's like, yeah, that's great. That's just a great
Yeah.
touch.
Yeah, the bird. And when we go into the history of Charles' family, we learn and see the writing from his grandfather about the birds, and it's just like it's
Right.
just it's all really atmospheric. I mean, that's kind of the thing about this book is like there's not a lot to talk about analysis wise, and like there's not a lot of themes going on here. It's just atmosphere. Like King is just playing an atmosphere, and he's doing a very, very good job of it.
Yeah, right. So many layers of it. Absolutely.
Yeah. So Charles learns the history of his family. He gets his grandfather's diary, which Cal is nice enough to decode for him. And we learn all about his disagreement with his brother, Philip, who had this evil worm book. Then they fell out when Charles, I think Charles' grandfather's name is Robert. I think I didn't actually write that down. Tries to destroy his brother's evil worm book, and it didn't work out too well. So we learn all about this is where we learn about the original Boone that founded Salem's Lot, which again kind of doesn't square with the history of Salem's Lot as we saw it, but also doesn't directly contradict it either. But basically, our understanding of this entire town was founded by this man Boone, who didn't have the E in his name, as like a worshiper of this worm. Like the whole town was founded for this evil purpose specifically.
You know, something finally just occurred to me is like Matt Burke talked ominously about the fact that like, well, you know, the real town old timers, they know the real secret history of the town.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't tell other people about it. And I don't even know all of it. And it's like that never really led to a place where it was like, and here is the secret history of the town. So maybe this is the secret history of the town. Like maybe, you know, the old timers all kind of knew these dark inklings about literal Satan worshipers who had founded the town.
Yeah. I mean, it certainly sets up an understanding of why this place is just inherently bad, right?
Yeah.
I mean, like from its founding, it was bad. From its founding, it was wrong. And everything has just kind of continued along that path. With different evil finding it throughout the years.
Right. It was always cursed. There was always this like borehole into insanity and evil.
Yeah. I love this part right here. The moon has risen over the sea, bloated, full, the color of blood, staining the ocean with a noxious shade. My mind turns to that church again, and here a line is struck out. But you shall not see that, Bones. It is too mad. It is time I slept, I think. My thoughts go out to you. This is, I think, one of the few times in this short story where like we almost break the story a little bit by having the narrator or the descendant of Charles Boone, we'll learn by the end of the story, like notes that a line was struck out in the writing. So we see like he's at this point not even able to bring himself to say what he's thinking and reveal the truth of what's going on here. And it really does a good job of showing how he is unhinged. And that leads perfectly into the next letter, which is just him writing to Bones saying, I can't write this yet. And then that's it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yet again, King employs the fear that you can create by not showing the thing.
Yeah. It's really perfect. And I mean, like, it's interesting because like I think sometimes with this epistolary stuff like is similar to like a found footage movie where you're like, why are you still writing about this? Like why haven't you put down the camera yet type stuff, right? But I think in this story, like I think King throws reason to that, right? Where I think Charles at one point says, I'm not even going to send these letters to you anymore. I need to write this down for myself. I need to get this down so it can be somewhere, so it can exist and I can process the way I'm feeling.
Yeah, right. That's true. Yeah. Which as the character becomes more and more sort of unhinged and overwhelmed by what they're seeing, you do sort of just buy like, oh yeah, I can buy someone writing letters as a way of coping with what's happening to them. Sure.
So what Charles can't bring himself to write about quite yet, though, is his trip down into the cellar of his house. This is, I think, some of the best writing of the story in my mind. This is some of the creepiest moments and just really fantastic horror writing here. How, Bones, can I describe the sight which fell upon our eyes? How can I tell you of the hideous tenants within our walls? The far wall swung back, and from the darkness a face leered, a face with eyes as even as the Styx itself. Its mouth yawned into a toothless, agonizing grin. One yellow rotted hand stretched itself out towards us. It made a hideous mewling sound and took a shambling step forward. The light from my candle fell upon it, and I saw a livid rope burn around its neck. From beyond it, something else moved, something I shall dream of until the day when all dreams cease. A girl with a pallid, moldering face and a corpse grin. A girl whose head lolled at a lunatic angle. So there's his ancestors hanging out in the walls of the house.
Yep. This is one of those points where it felt a little unrealistic that they didn't just burn the fucking house down and flee to Florida. But then actually it's a very Lovecraft thing to have like the scion of the cursed house, the cursed bloodline becomes obsessed with the past, and like leaving sort of has ceased to become an option at this point.
Yeah, he's part of it now. He can't escape it.
Right.
Yeah, I love it. And this is one of those. See, the things that really creep me out and make me uncomfortable in stories is it's not always the thing that is said, but the thing that is unsaid. And the thing that I love about this is you realize in this moment that every bump and groan and noise in the house up until this point were these two and possibly more people, right? They were undead people scurrying about in the walls, bumping about, making noise. And it's just so creepy. Like, to imagine that, like, you're sitting there in your bedroom trying to sleep and there's a bump on your wall and you're like, oh, the rats. Like, no, that was a corpse.
Yeah.
Just right next to your head on the other side of the wall making bumps. It's just like deliciously thought-provoking and horror producing. I love it.
Yes, it immediately makes you reflect back on every previous scene where they talked about the sounds. Yeah.
So this is, I think I jumped ahead a little bit, but Cal finds and decrypts the journal of Robert Boone, which tells a story of his brother's encounter with the founder of Salem's Lot, James Boone, who we do learn is a relation of these Boones. And I love the way this journal ends, Matt. All tends to climax, yet unforeseen. I dare not sleep for the dreams that come, yet not remain awake for what lunatic terrors may come. The night is full of awful sounds, and I fear, and yet I feel the urge to go again, to watch, to see. It seems that Philip himself calls me, and the old man, the birds, cursed, cursed, cursed. Here the diary of Robert Boone ends. I love this. I love the capitalized words, right? Climax is capitalized here. Dreams is capitalized. Terrors, sounds, these random words capitalized in this passage of this totally unhinged man writing in his diary. And it's just so evocative and spooky.
Yeah. I mean, and yet again, we have nested storytelling, which I've now firmly come to see as a King staple.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Obviously in the Dark Tower. So.
Yeah, definitely. So Charles decides that he must return to Jerusalem's Lot, if only to destroy the books, which has been the source of his family's great curse. Despite his disagreement, his manservant Cal follows him, but in classic Stephen King style, he uses this epistolary format to let us know that Cal does not make it out of the encounter alive, right? The letter that is about to describe the climax of the story begins with, "Oh, Cal, he has no more bones. He has gone in my place, in the place of this wretch with his pipe stem arms and skull face, who I see reflected back in the darkened glass." I love this, right? This choice of like beginning the thing saying, okay, so Calvin's going to die, and now you get to figure out how.
Right.
So Charles tells the story of the return to the lot and the church at its center. They find the church in shambles with a lamb that was squeezed to death sitting on top of the altar. What a good image, right? Like, just the creepiness of it. It's not that it was sacrificed. It's not that it was sliced open, but just squeezed to death, which really, it's with the worm imagery, really just works. Really just works.
Yeah, and it forces you to imagine something very vividly that you might otherwise have kind of glossed over.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so Charles picks up the book, and then suddenly the church is full of a congregation of the worm, all the dead people, some of which are his descendants, some of which are the missing residents of Jerusalem's Lot, all here. And then the book seizes hold of him, and he starts incanting as well. And that's when we see Yog-Sothoth for the first time. And then if you had any doubts about this being a Lovecraft story, there's your answer right there.
Exactly. Yeah. And just the sort of similar things that the, Lovecraftian cultists would be chanting in this situation.
Yeah. Servant of Yog-Sothoth, the nameless one, the worm from beyond space, star eater, blinder of time, Verminous, now comes the hour of filling, the time of rending, Verminous, it's so wonderful. I guess this is like the first time you've read King like textually do Lovecraft, right?
In a way that was this explicit. Yeah. I mean, so the only other instance I can think of is, there was some graffiti in, Needful Things that was like Yog-Sothoth rules.
Yeah.
Something like that. And that was me at like, I recognized that for what it was, but that was really all that I can remember actually.
Sure. And I think there are some throwaway references in the Dark Tower itself, but this is definitely the first. It's not his only story that deals with this. That's for sure. He's got some better ones. There's a story called Crouch End that I really enjoy that is also textually just a Lovecraftian story.
That sounds fun.
So our heroic manservant Calvin pushes Charles off the altar just in time as the maw of the worm itself erupts from the floor. Charles lights the book on fire, thus stopping the ritual and sending the worm back from which it came. But then he flees, leaving the corpse of his friend behind. So Calvin gets tossed across the room by a giant death worm, and Charles runs away.
Yeah, it's interesting how important characters named Calvin are in King stories. This is another
you
name
think
we
he
can
just
pay
likes the
attention
name Calvin?
Yeah,
I think he just likes the name Talon.
Yeah. Cool.
I love this line here. I ran because even in my crazed state and even in the shattered ruin of that dead yet animated shape, I had seen the family resemblance. So he's talking about Boone, who the corpse of Boone approached him even after he burnt the book. Yet not a Philip or Robert whose likeness hangs in an upstairs gallery. That rotted visage belonged to James Boone, keeper of the worm. He still lives somewhere in the twisted, lightless wanderings beneath Jerusalem's lot and Chapel Waite, and it still lives. The burning of the book thwarted it, but there are other copies. Yet I am the gateway, and I am the last Boone blood. For the good of all humanity, I must die and break the chain forever. So, I mean, this is a fairly short story, right, man? I think this is like 30-something pages, and it's amazing that we've gone so quickly from a letter of like, oh, yes, I'm in this new, it's lovely, I love the architecture, and the people in town are a little bit odd, to I am the gate, I must eliminate myself. For the good of all humanity, I must die. And then and we learned that he did take his own life to save the world.
Yeah, well, you definitely got to put your foot on the gas when you're telling a short story.
Sure.
I mean, that's one of the things that, we really appreciated the slow burn of Salem's Lot, where we spent, we commented often on how long it took us to get to the point where somebody said the word vampire, or where people are even seriously considering the idea that something supernatural might be happening. But, in a short story, you have to, we still got what sort of felt like a slow burn, although it was really only a few pages.
Yeah.
But no, I thought it was great. It's a great, so I think as we kind of wrap up discussing this story and move on to the next one, I see a lot of King's short stories as him being like, I really like this kind of story. I really like, epistolary stories. I really like Lovecraft stories. I want to explore that space. I want to try to do that myself, but of course not just like copy it, but like do it my way, or maybe fix some of the things that I see as being, not quite the way I would do them. And so that that's where I feel like I learned a lot about King here. Is I don't know, it made it feel very relatable to me, because frankly I also like writing epistolary stories. Like I mentioned the other day, like one of my Do the Right Thing entries was like an excerpt from a technical manual for like some kind of science fiction device that I had thought about, and it was like, okay, well, I could just like write a story about this science fiction device, but it sounds like a very fun idea to write what they would have said about this thing in the technical manual and the technical specs. Like that's a fun way of framing that. And I think King is always thinking about like, not just like what's the story, but like what's the most fun way of portraying this actually.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. And again, this might just be because I'm coming off of Dracula. I really enjoy this style of storytelling. I really do. I think it's very fun. It's very different. I'm not saying all stories should be written like this, but I do think it adds something that you can't really get any other way. You can't. There's not a way to replicate this outside of just doing it, I think. And I think it works really well in Dracula. It makes that story, even a story that's over 120 years older, it makes it a page turner because you're just invested in what these people are saying about their lives, and you filling in the blanks between the letters and between the entries in the diaries and stuff like that. I just really liked it, and I had forgotten that this story was this way until I opened it up to read it in preparation for the show. And yeah, it's a lot of fun, man. It is like, it's just a fun way to write, I think.
Yeah, I love it.
And that is the end of our story here. We end on a final note, which I think is one of these things that you can get away with doing in a short story, but not a longer story, where we end with James Boone, descendant of Charles Boone, 120 years later. He's found all these notes. He is the person that has found Charles Boone's letters, and he's put them aside as nonsense. And also says, I've moved into my ancestral home, and the only thing that my ancestor said that was true at all was that these damn rats in the walls are so loud. And it's just a perfect fun and note of doom to end the story on. That, again, I just don't think you can get away with doing that in a long form story. Like, your readers will riot if you just like, and then everyone's fucked. Like, I just like, you can get away with that in short stories so much easier because there's just so much less investment in the characters and the story, and you've just spent less time on it.
Yeah, I think the medium of short story actually is one where we have learned to expect a kind of terrible stinger at the end.
Sure, yeah.
Whereas novels, we actually prefer like catharsis and closure, and a stinger just feels like, oh, you've cheated me out of like the real ending.
I think actually some of Stephen King's like most derided endings are ones in which he tries to get away with using a short story stinger at the end of a full novel, and people just are not having it.
That's interesting. I wonder if we'll come across any of those examples in our project.
Let me think about it. Maybe. We'll see.
Yeah, the man in black fled into the desert and the gunslinger followed.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, honestly, the Dark Tower is one that I think in the short story you just chuckle and go, very clever, very clever.
Yeah, that's clever. And yeah.
At the end of a 7-book series that you've invested decades of your life to, you're like you son of a bitch.
No. Which, yeah, I mean, I loved it, but I've said before, I can appreciate people being like, that's not what I was promised.
Yeah. For sure. All right. Let's make our way into our second story of the night. This is One for the Road. This actually was first published in a 1977 issue of Maine, which is a magazine, I think, that existed in Maine, and then was later collected into Night Shift a year later. One for the Road, unlike Jerusalem's Lot, is textually a direct sequel to Salem's Lot, and there's no dubious connection here. One for the Road does indeed take place on the same level of a tower as Salem's Lot. We get direct references to the final events of that book here, so it is just a direct sequel.
Yes, definitely. It made me wonder how it was received by people unfamiliar with the novel.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know. I definitely did not read it until after I had read Salem's Lot. So I feel like there's got to be some people out there that read this first, for sure.
Yeah.
I think I kind of was reading it with that in mind, and I think it gives you enough that you can follow it just fine. Like, it's not like the way it introduces vampires into the story is not like, as it's obviously not a slow burn as Salem's Lot was, but it does take the time to like establish, oh, it's vampires, here's what's going on, this town was overrun by vampires, everybody knows about it, and they are on their guard around this town.
I mean, I actually think it could have been fun to read without the knowledge, because then you would have a sense of like, what are they worried about? Why are they acting so weird about this?
Sure. So our story begins in classic Stephen King fashion with two old dudes hanging out at a bar. We have Herb Tuchetlander, which is the most perfect name I've ever heard in my life. the owner of Old Tukey's, and he's ready to close up his bar for the night. The story is told in first-person perspective by Booth, a regular attendee of Tukey's bar. Matt, is this the first-person King story you've read outside of that one section in Wind Through the Keyhole?
I think so. I can't recall anything else. There might have been some other short story I read at one point, but I don't really remember clearly.
Okay.
And obviously, you're right. Herb Tucklander, the most Tolkien / King goddamn thing I've ever seen. Like somehow Herb Tucklander is even more Tolkien than Belladonna Took or whatever. And of course it's actually referential because the name Took shows up again in the Kala.
It does.
Took's General Store.
Yeah.
So he loves naming stores after Took's.
It's interesting that the Took in Wolves of the Kala is not a favorable character. We don't like him, but this guy, this is a really quality guy. Like these two old men. Like if we want to look for examples of the white working through people, these are guys that really go above and beyond to try to help. Yeah,
that's a good point. I mean, definitely kind of reminds you of, Peregrine Took, right?
So right as they're having their final drink, one for the road, if you will. It's not even my joke. It's textual in the book. They say, "How about we have one for the road?" And then the door bursts open and our inciting incident wanders in. We find out that this man is Gerard Lumley, a city boy from New Jersey who is driving through Maine with his family. Their car went off the road 6 miles away from the store, and he's walked all the way here to try to get some help. So here's our inciting incident. I think it's a great moment, Matt. It's really just like, oh, here's the story bursting into the room.
Yeah, this is some good dangle pacing. Also, I think Lumley is just a fantastic name.
It is.
It's like it's that thing that King has done that we pointed out a few times, where it's like it sounds like Glumley, but it is of course an actual name, right? Like I'm sure Lumley is an actual name. So anyway, like he has a great talent for finding a name that sounds like the thing that he wants you to be thinking about.
Yeah, I think you're totally right. Like Gerard Lumley, like you get a perfect image of who this guy is.
Yeah, exactly.
But before we handle Gerard himself, we have to do the classic King diversion here, Matt. I love this so much. We hiked him across the fireplace and got him sat down in a rocker that used to be Mrs. Tookey's favorite until she passed on in 1974. It was Mrs. Tukey that was responsible for most of the place, which had been written up in Down East and the Sunday Telegram and even once in the Sunday supplement of the Boston Globe. It's really more of a public house than a bar, with its big wooden floor pegged together rather than nailed, the maple bar, the old barn raftered ceiling, and the monstrous big fieldstone hearth. Mrs. Tukey started to get some ideas in her head after the Down East article came out, wanted to start calling the place Tukey's Inn or Tukey's Rest, and I admit it had sort of a colonial ring to it, but I preferred plain old Tukey's Bar. It's one thing to get uppish in the summer when the state's full of tourists, another thing altogether in the winter when you and your neighbors have to trade together. And there had been plenty of winter nights, like this one, that Tukey and I had spent all alone together, drinking scotch and water or just a few beers. My own Victoria passed on in 1973, and Tukey's was the place to go, where there were enough voices to mute the steady ticking of the death watch beetle. Even if there was just Tukey and me, it was enough. It wouldn't have felt the same about the place if it had been Tukey's Rest. It's crazy, but it's true. So I read all this only to a man has burst in the door. The inciting incident is occurring, and Booth goes, "Let me tell you about this bar."
Yeah.
And it's fascinating to me because it works. It works on multiple levels. It works because I think this is genuinely good writing and interesting and like really helps you understand who both Tukey and Booth are as people. But it also just strikes me as just a very classic, I'm an old man telling you a story of what happened to me, and I'm going to just like get distracted and go down a rabbit hole of something I think about. Like I'm telling you the story, and then we sat this guy down in the rocker, and the rocker, that was owned by Mrs. Tukey. And then, well, you got to hear about her because she's actually the one that was in charge of this whole thing. And, oh, let me tell you about the time she thought we'd rename and it's just like this perfect, the natural human thing. I think like stereotypically an old man quality, which I think like this is a very young Stephen King writing about a very old man. So I don't know, like it just, it's perfect to me. It's really perfect.
Yeah. I had an onion in my belt, which was the style at the time.
Yes,
I mean,
it is old man Simpson. Absolutely.
The thing that I think about is I agree that it works, and it should, and it seems like it shouldn't. And I was thinking, about this.
Why does it work? Why does it work?
Because it's like it's something like there are a lot of subtle kind of rules of thumb with pacing where you might think, and I've been thinking about this a lot lately because I've been thinking about like how King is so good at certain things. But thinking about the idea where it's like, okay, fundamental creative writing advice is like you want your story to be propulsive and fast paced, and you want to move things along, you want to move the plot along, and it's like, okay, that's all true. But if you take that too literally, then you actually forget to ground your setting and your characters in the sort of mundane detail of like, why is it called Tuki's Bar? What does it look like? What is the relationship between Tuki and our narrator? How long, like, are they close friends? Was he just stopping by for a beer and they don't really know each other? These are all things that are not crucial to your understanding of the plot, but important to your feeling invested in the story and connected to the characters. And now, okay, all of that being said, King knows better than to just front load the short story with some rambling description of the bar, because that's boring. You don't care yet. So I think cleverly, actually, he waits until after he's lured you in a little bit further by having a mysterious man burst in through the door, and then he hits you with some description and some setting and some background and some characterization, and then he feeds you a little bit more of the plot. And so there has to be this delicate interplay between the setting and characterization and the plot advancement, where you're not rushing through, but you're also not stalling out, right? And I think this is my assessment for why this works.
Yeah, no, I think you're onto something there. I think you're right. And I think it is, we talked when we finished The Dark Tower about the intangible, right? Like of what takes a story and elevates it beyond, I'm enjoying this, to this is one of my all-time favorite things. And I think it's intangible stuff like this that you wouldn't even think about. Like, is it important to the story that we know about Tuklander and Booth's friendship? Yeah. But like, how much is it important to the story?
Yeah. Well, it's the sort of thing where it's not important to the narrative, but it's important to you caring about the characters.
Right. I think a lot of times we get so concerned with narrative and plot that we forget about those ineffable elements of story, which is how do you get the person reading your story to buy into it and care? And it is rarely done solely through the narrative or the drive of the plot. It has to go through character, and then through character, it has to go through character relationships. Like, we said this 100 times during The Dark Tower, but I don't think you get sad when a character dies in a story. You get sad because the other characters are sad about the character. Like, right. when Eddie died, I was sad that Eddie was gone, but I was mostly sad for Susanna and for Roland and for Jake and their experience with losing Eddie. Like, that's the truly heartbreaking moments of that whole thing, is
exactly
when Eddie is talking with Susanna, or when Eddie's final words with Roland. And so that relationship needs to be the most important thing. And I mean, we're getting a little off track here, but arguably the most important thing to this story is the relationship between Tuklander and Booth, because we need to understand these two old men that spend their time drinking alone together. What would drive them to actually stick together and try to help in this situation?
Exactly. Once again, the heart of the story is actually the quartet, which is these two men.
Yeah. 100%. So speaking of getting back to the plot, let's do that now, because the two find out that poor Mr. Gerard has broken down in Salem's Lot, Jerusalem's Lot. We find out in this moment that the 2 years ago the town was burned out, which puts us on the timeline. We know that it's been 2 years since Ben and Mark came back to stop the evil that was in Salem's Lot. But Matt, that means that they were not successful, right? The idea that there are still vampires in the lot means that Ben and Mark failed, right?
Yeah, that was the most depressing part. Actually, was realizing that like they've failed, and that means they either gave up or dot dot dot.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think. I mean, because we have future knowledge of Wolves of the Kala, we know that it's not like they died and were turned into vampires. Because again, we attend Ben Mears' funeral with a grown-up Mark Petrie, so we know that they survive.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that. Okay, good. I'm less depressed now.
Yeah, but like, what happened? Because I think it's interesting. Like, maybe this was just me, but I left Salem's Lot with this indication that the burning of the tower was just the first step. They were going to burn the town to like remove all the hiding places for the vampires, and then they were going to like clean house with Salem's Lot, and they were going to wipe out every single vampire. And it seems to have not happened. And it seems like King in just a few years kind of changed his mind about that. I mean, maybe it was just like, it's too delicious to have just this spot on the map that is just evil demon place. But it does change Mark and Ben's success in this whole thing.
Yeah, right. I mean, it was a sort of limited success where it's like, well, they successfully burned out the town, which means nobody else is going to wander in there thinking that they should move in. And everyone in the area knows that it's cursed, basically. But but they didn't succeed in killing the evil and rooting it out. And maybe that's supposed to say something about the idea that like, well, you never were going to be able to defeat the evil. You can win a victory, but it's never a permanent victory.
Yeah, no, I agree. Another interesting thing that happens, and we kind of already touched on this, is that these two men decide to help this man get back to his family. Like, they hear that they're at Jerusalem's Lot, and they could have just gone, sorry, bud, they're dead. Good luck. Here's the number for the sheriff. We're just going to pack up and head home. But they don't do that, right? They promise to help him.
Yeah, right. And this is another moment that makes us, love and care about them in relatively short order. We're invested in these characters because they're willing to risk their lives for this guy who they don't really know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. I think to circle back around to something you said at the beginning, another fun idea here is the potential of reading the story without having read Salem's Lot, and then so you see their reaction to hearing about that they were going through the lot is really interesting here, because you don't understand where this tension is coming from. And then they start like pulling out crucifixes and St. Christopher's medals and Bibles and shit. And you're like, oh damn, what's going on here? And then Booth goes on another tangent talking about that he only actually heard the word vampire said once, and it was by a person who didn't actually believe they were vampires, which is a really interesting touch, right? Like, we're told that everyone surrounding the town of Salem's Lot in Maine basically knows what's going on there, right? They all wear crucifixes or St. Christopher's medals. They keep holy water. They keep Bibles. They don't go into Salem's Lot at nighttime. They all know what it is, but they don't ever say it. They don't acknowledge it as a thing.
Yeah. I don't know what to make of that exactly. It's just I guess I like it. I don't know what it's saying, if anything.
Mm-hmm. I don't know. I think just this idea that once again we're terrified of putting a label on the evil. Like, this is, I think, more of the Salem's Lot thing, where we know what's here, we know what it is, we avoid it, but we don't deal with it. Nobody's dealing with it. Nobody's solving the problem. They're just avoiding it.
And also, it's like, well, no, it would be obvious that this is insane and that we should be horrified if we name it. But if we just kind of talk around the edges of it, then we can kind of not ever look directly at it and not feel that level of like terror that we should feel.
Yeah. And the only person that puts a name to the thing is the one who doesn't actually believe it is what it is. And of course, is punished for that. Poor Richie Messina, who tests his theory that it's just a pack of wild dogs and heads into Salem's Lot at night. And they got him. They got him.
Yeah. King's universe is not one that rewards brave stupidity.
No. I think, we're going to sound like a broken record here, Matt, but my favorite part about the story is not the story, it's the digressions. And I love this digression. Maine blizzard? Ever been out in one? The snow comes flying so thick and fine that it looks like sand and sounds like that, beating on the sides of your car or pickup. You don't want to use your high beams because they reflect off the snow and you can't see 10 feet in front of you. With the low beams on, you can see maybe 15 feet, but can live with the snow. It's the wind I don't like. When it picks up and begins to howl, driving the snow into 100 weird flying shapes and sounding like all the hate and pain and fear in the world, there's death in the throat of a snowstorm wind. White death. And maybe something beyond death. That's no sound to hear when you're tucked up all cozy in your own bed with the shutters bolted and the doors locked. It's that much worse if you're driving. And we were driving smack into Salem's Lot. Just like, come on, man. Like, it's brilliant.
It's so good. It's so good.
Describe a snowstorm. Go. And make it better than that. Can you? You can't.
Yeah, you can't. I also like how there's a sense here that there's this kind of parallel being drawn between the vampires and the snowstorm, actually.
Yeah.
Like a supernatural connection. And also it made me think about the fact that like when people get really cold, there's like a seductiveness to the idea of like, oh, I just need to rest. I just need to lie down for a second. And it's like, it kind of reminds me of how the vampires will kind of seductively draw you in.
Yeah. I mean, this is a recurring beat in Salem's Lot and in this story that in the final moment before you're about to be consumed by a vampire, you always are struck with this. Wouldn't it be so much easier to just give in and let it happen? Yeah. I think that's like, again, refers to King's entire thing on evil, right? This is the way evil succeeds, is because it makes you feel like everything would be easier if you just give in to it.
Yeah. I like that. Yeah. No, but I like that. I mean, there's obviously a ton to pull out about this passage that you quoted, but I think my favorite might be the snow comes flying so thick and fine that it looks like sand and sounds like that.
Yeah.
And the sentence goes on from there, but it's like, it's just the way people talk. That's the way people talk, right?
Yeah.
Because you might expect it to be, it looks like sand and sounds like sand as well, or something like that. But no, he writes it the way this old codger would say it. But that's really fun.
Isn't it fascinating that he can do that and have something that sounds exactly like what an old man would talk, and then you don't want to use your high beams because they reflect. You with your low beams you can see 15 feet, and then it like transitions. It transitions from this, I think, very normal way people talk to there's death in the throat of a sandstorm wind, white death, and maybe something beyond death, which is like, that's not the way people talk. Like nobody is like talking like that. But if you're storytelling, you might use that kind of language, right? Like, and the way that King is able to build from the bottom level of this is just the way average Joes talk, to like build and build and build. Like there's this paragraph by itself has its own sense of climax, its own sense of building tension, where like we start off just talking about the blizzard, talking about sand, talking about high beams and low beams, and then it builds and builds and builds. And as it builds, the language gets more narrative, more story driven.
Yeah, right. I mean, it ceases to sound like what an old codger would say and becomes this like transcendent. But it still works. Yet again, it's a weird thing where it's like, man, I wouldn't do it that way, but it clearly works.
Well, you can almost see the way in which this old man is getting swept up into his own story, because like starts very, very mundane and basic, and then gets pulled into his own story crafting, and his language elevates to match.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
So they finally get back to Gerard's car. And I love this moment right before they get there where Tuki's like, here's how it's going to go down. If your wife and daughter are in the car, great, we'll go get them and we'll go. But if they're not in the car, we're getting the fuck out of here and we're getting the sheriff. And Gerard, who they still haven't explained like anything of what's going on, is like, why wouldn't they be in the car? It's freezing cold outside. Why wouldn't they be in the car?
Yeah.
And then, of course, spoilers, they are not in the car.
Yeah. It's which we knew that would happen.
Yeah. I mean, they never really, do you think it's an interesting choice that there's never a moment where they like try to explain to him what's going on in Salem's Lot? Like they'd say like, obviously they're not going to put vampires to it, but like evil things have got your kid and your wife. Like they don't really even ever try. I think they just like accurately understand that no one's going to believe this stuff.
Yeah, it seemed realistic to me that they would just know that like he's in a full panic. Nothing we say, especially if it sounds as crazy as this sounds, is going to persuade him. So why bother?
Yeah, I think you're right. I love this line. Holy God, Booth, Tuki said, just below the scream of the wind. I think it's happened again. Like this is just like a regular occurrence for them at this point.
Yeah, basically it is, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So Gerard Lumley finds his daughter's coat in the car. Again, not a very good sign. He sees some tracks in the snow and sprints off after them. The two old men try to convince him to come back, that that's not going to work. And just as you think maybe they're starting to get him to understand the hopelessness of the situation and that he needs to come back, they hear a voice on the wind, a voice coming out of the dark like a little tinkling silver bells. Jerry, is that you?
Love it.
And we know what's happening.
Yeah. Yay, she's alive.
Yeah.
Oh wait, no. No, it's great. And then the rest. It's funny because the rest of the story almost writes itself. You're like,
yeah, right.
You're like, yeah, I know what's going to happen from here.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the only question I guess is like, is our storyteller going to make it out?
Presumably, since he's the one telling the story.
Indeed, right. I think I was also like, well, maybe Tuki doesn't make it out, but
yeah, or maybe he's just telling the story to his vampire friends about how he became a vampire one day.
Right. Hey, maybe that's what they do in all their dead time.
Yeah. I love the moment where like we see the description of Jerry's wife and she's like dark and beautiful and Booth almost immediately wants her, right? Like he wants to go over to her and comfort her and be with her. And this is kind of this dangerous, dark attraction of the vampire that we've seen repeated again and again throughout these stories, that like the connection of sexuality and vampirism continues in this story.
Yeah. Right.
But Booth's friend Tuki stops him from walking over to the vampire, but nobody stops poor Gerard Lumley, who goes directly to his undead wife. And then she looks over and smiles at our character, which is just like, what an asshole. Like, just like this victorious, I won. Haha. You suck.
Right. We don't get that much screen time of vampires in Salem's Lot. So I actually thought this was kind of a neat little window into like the way they behave, and so there's like a vindictiveness gloating here.
Yeah, definitely. So the two men flee, and of course they encounter the other vampire on their way back to the car. This one is the little girl. Mister, she said in a high, clear voice, as sweet as morning mist, won't you help me find my mother? She's gone, and I'm so cold. Honey, I said, honey, you better get in the truck. Your mother's... I broke off, and if there was ever a time in my life I was close to swooning, that was the moment. She was standing there, you see, but she was standing on top of the snow, and there were no tracks, not in any direction. I love, like, the thing about these vampires is they're so damn effective. Like, the thing about this moment, Matt, is he knows she's a vampire. Like, he is immediately taken up by it, and then realizes it's a mistake when he sees she's standing on top of the snow. And yet he still picks her up and is about to get killed by her, because like the once again, the hypnotic nature of vampires is just one that even if you know better, you can't help yourself. And I think that's a really important aspect of them that I don't know if we talked about enough in our discussion of Salem's Lot.
Yeah, sure. That's a good point. I mean, especially the idea of like a vampire child is something that, you love to see it. And it's
Really? Do you
super,
love to see it?
you love to see it. And it's super creepy in and of itself. And then the idea that it's like hypnotizing you and manipulating you with its powers is like a whole extra level.
Yeah. She just wants a good night kiss. That's
yeah.
what she wants.
I think it makes it, I don't know, maybe it's belaboring the obvious, but like, it's one thing to have a supernatural creature that wants to drink blood, but it's another where it's like, if it's even near you, there's a good chance that it's already kind of won. Like, you're not going to be able to fight it. You're not going to be able to run. You just have to kind of helplessly watch yourself succumb.
Is this just a truism of the nature of evil in the Kingverse, that it is kind of hypnotic? It is temptation made manifest, where it overpowers your better judgment, even if you should know better.
Certainly seems to be the case in the examples we've seen.
Yeah, I think so. Fortunately, even though he's about to pick up the little vampire girl and get his goodnight kiss from her, our boy Took is once again at it, and he beans the vampire in the chest with a fucking Bible, which is just powerful enough to scare the little girl away and save our narrator's life. Best moment in the story for sure.
Yeah, but I mean, huge plot hole, because why didn't Callahan think of this? Your average Catholic church has like hundreds of Bibles.
So many Bibles.
Built some kind of like holy water powered pneumatic Bible gun to just. I'm just saying, Scott.
Holy water powered pneumatic Bible gun is not a sentence I thought we'd be hearing in today's episode. But you know what? I can't. You're right. This is the flaw of Father Callahan. It is not his lack of faith. It is not his inability to believe in his God and himself. It is just that he didn't have that idea.
Yeah, it's a lack of MacGyverishness is what it is.
Yeah. Now, if it is holy water powered, would the holy water propel the Bible, or would it just, like, are we soaking the Bibles in holy water before we're launching them?
I think it's like a long tube with like high pressure holy water in the tank, and you slot the Bibles into kind of like a feed in the side, and then the pressure like launches them. So you got like basically high powered spray of holy water with a Bible like kind of caught up in it,
just to give it a little bit of more force.
Yeah.
Now, does it need to be like, I'm trying to be more efficient here. Like, yes, Catholic churches do have hundreds of Bibles, but that's not that much ammo when you're dealing with all of Salem's Lot. Can we do I'm thinking like of a spitball, but it's a page from the Bible. Well, would that work?
I assume so.
Is that something?
I mean, one assumes, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think so. Also, one idea would be, like a sturdy rubber band kind of thing, where you kind of have the Bible on a rubber band, and you're like throwing it, but then like pulling it back, so you can basically reuse the same projectile multiple times. So our quartet at the end of the book should have been running around with Bibles on rubber bands, just like haphazardly flinging them all around themselves.
I mean, you're absolutely right. This is such a massive plot hole, and frankly, has ruined Salem's Lot for me.
Yeah,
forever.
I mean, they could have just easily won, honestly. If just imagine how like really genuinely awesome and badass it would have been if instead of the ending we got, it was just all them like slapping Barlow with Bibles on rubber bands.
Yeah. I'm now getting a little bit nervous that some people might not realize that we're just kidding, and that would be terrible.
And that we're just being extremely deadpan. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that would be.
So I'm just going to state that just so everyone knows. And then we're going to wrap up the short story.
Sounds good.
So the story ends with Took kind of finishing off the encounter, or not Took, Booth, saying that his friend Took died of a heart attack not too long later, a couple years later. And then he finishes this with... You may have an occasion to be traveling in southern Maine yourself one of these days. Pretty part of the countryside. You may even stop by Tuki's bar for a drink. Nice place. They kept the name just the same. So have your drink. And then my advice is to keep right on moving north. Whatever you do, don't go up that road to Jerusalem's lot. Especially not after dark. There's a little girl somewhere out there, and I think she's still waiting for her goodnight kiss. Perfect ending. Perfect.
Yep. I mean, yet again, we kind of have the like. It's not as much of a stinger as the other one, but it is like a no real resolution. The evil is still out there.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's great.
It's perfect. So yeah, that is the end of our 2 different stories. Stories again that I enjoyed, but I don't think would be my favorite of that particular collection. Matt, did you get any chance to read any more stories in Night Shift while you were listening?
Well, number one, I should mention I actually read them with my human eyeballs.
Oh my gosh.
But yes, I read Graveyard Shift, the other one about rats.
The rats.
The rats. The one that he clearly thought of when he was working at that laundromat when he was younger. Just like mutant rats living underneath the laundromat. It's fun. There were bits of it that felt a little, you could tell he's a young writer. Let me say it that way.
Sure.
Where like I just didn't get certain things, or there were like implications that never seemed to head anywhere. But still, like it's a very fun, creepy idea, and I liked it overall.
It's a pretty good collection of short stories. I mean, this is the one that has Children of the Corn in it. It also has The Lawnmower Man, which is nothing like the movie The Lawnmower Man. It has Trucks, which is was eventually made into a movie as well. It's got a lot of cool stories in it. I particularly like The Ledge, which is just a fun, tense horror horror. I don't know if it's horror. It's just really tense, kind of thriller type story. It's got Quitters Inc., which is a story about a group of a company that helps you quit smoking, which is really good. It's also got I Know What You Need, which is the one that that friend of the show, Julia Marquezi, is doing the Dollar Baby that we talked about. So it's a fun collection, Night Shift. I don't think it was my favorite short story collection. I think Skeleton Crew would be my favorite, but it's a good one.
Yeah, I might pick out some more of those since I've got a little bit of plane riding time ahead of me. So
yeah, man. And now that you own the book, you can just read. You can
exactly.
Read. All right, so that is going to do it for us with Jerusalem's Lot and One for the Road for us this week. Before we go, we do have to circle back around to our mailbag questions from a couple weeks ago now. We'll just answer these as quick as we can. Sorry again for the confusion last week, but here we go. We're answering your questions. So you want to begin, Matt, with the first one?
Emperor Fry the Solid says, do you feel like the character of Father Callahan is consistent between Salem's Lot and the Dark Tower? I recall on first read feeling like these are 2 different characters that got sewn together. Yes, there's many years between fleeing the town and coming across the Padre and the Kala, so maybe he's evolved. But the 2 characters never felt cohesive to me. Curious where you both fall on that.
No, I think he's a different character. I think that's okay. Like I think Father Callahan in Salem's Lot was not written to be this type of character that he turns into in Wolves of the Kala. So that's why he feels so different. And I think it's a writer that has got more skill and more ability to characterize, and I think he makes a much more complicated character. So, I mean, I can see the transition, but I do think they're very different.
Yeah, there's certain things that Dark Tower Callahan does that I'm just like, I just don't think that's in the makeup of the character that we saw. That's like you said, it's like King's a better writer. He's a better psychologist. He just makes a more multidimensional character out of Per Callahan. But yeah, I think I agree. And it doesn't help that like the 2 audiobook readers for the Dark Tower versus for Wolves just have completely different, or rather the Dark Tower versus Salem's Lot have totally different different portrayals of how he speaks and just in every possible way. So it's very hard for me to actually see them as the same person.
Yeah. I don't I feel like no matter how talented of a reader you are, returning to a character that you haven't written in 30 years, it would just be really, really hard to channel the character the exact same way. So, I mean, I think he's going to feel different no matter what. And I think that's fine because King has evolved him and is doing different things with him. But yeah. I'm Your Density asks, and we kind of accidentally already answered this. I'm curious, did Matt buy the entirety of Night Shift for the short stories? Yes, you did.
I did, and I will probably read more of them.
Mm-hmm. Also curious if you guys will add Night Surf from the collection to the reading list after The Stand. I don't know. I'm hesitant about these short stories. I think today's episode went okay, but I'm hesitant about the short stories because I'm just not sure how much there is to talk about them sometimes. But that could be fun. You're not going to understand that at all, Matt, but it's very, very loosely connected to The Stand.
Gotcha.
That short story. They also mention a movie, 1987's A Return to Salem's Lot, which is a sequel to Salem's Lot that is just a trash movie. It's delightfully bad, I'm Your Density says. In a weird way, it's charming and engaging like other lowly thought of King adaptations. So maybe we'll take a look at that someday. Not anytime soon.
Yeah. Maybe it'll make its way onto other levels of the tower at some point.
Mm-hmm.
Next, we have Baby, Can You Dig Your Sam? They say, I am curious as to whether or not one of you had any nightmares or unnerving moments related to your reading of this book. And then they tell a story. They say, about a month ago, I woke in the middle of the night, was having a difficult time falling back to sleep. Precursor to insomnia. Anyway, I grabbed Salem's Lot and went to the living room to read for a bit, so I didn't wake up my sleeping husband. When I put the book down, I noticed that the curtains that cover the sliding doors to our balcony were partially open, and the glass door was not closed over the screen door.
Oh my God.
In that moment, I was 100% convinced that something bad was out on my balcony. I got up the nerve, and with my head turned to the side, and definitely not looking out on the balcony, just in case there was a vampire out there trying to hypnotize me, I shut the curtains and door, and then ran back to my bedroom. I have not encountered any vampires. I have had a lot of weird house-related dreams with like labyrinths of underneath houses. So that happened totally. But that's not necessarily Salem's Lot specific.
I never remember my dreams, so I have not had any weird Salem's Lot related dreams. I do just like anytime I'm like sitting by myself in an empty room reading something a little spooky, I tend to start to notice sounds more. And that definitely happened a couple times while reading Salem's Lot. I do think that just like reading for this kind of thing, for me, I almost like separate myself from the emotion of it because I'm just thinking about it in a different kind of way. I'm thinking about what I'm going to say and what I should be focusing on. And I don't know. I never, get into it in an emotional level when I'm prepping for the show. It's just a little different. So
yeah, that's one of the downsides of doing a show like this actually is it puts a little bit of a critical distance between you and the stuff.
Yeah. Still got really sad at the end of Dark Tower no matter what though.
Yeah.
All right. Shenanigoats says a remake of Salem's Lot has been announced with Jake Gyllenhaal rumored to play Ben Mears. What are some of the shortcomings from either the book or previous adaptations that this movie could improve upon? Well, we can't talk about previous adaptations yet. That'll be for next week. But as far as the book, what do you think, Matt? What if you're directing and writing the newest adaptation of Salem's Lot? What do you think you're going to do to fix its shortcomings?
Going to be somewhat lazy and hit upon things we talked about before, which would be that if Ben Mears is supposed to be the protagonist, give him a little bit more meat to his character.
Mm-hmm. I agree. Yeah. I wonder if there's a way. Is there a way to channel the and we'll see when we talk about the Salem's Lot next week. But is there a way to channel the town central character of it in a movie form? Do you think any adaptation could get away with doing that?
It's probably a creative way that a creative director could do that, but nothing like I don't necessarily see how that would be done, myself. Next, from All 84001, they say, why did King bring Father Callahan back into the Dark Tower? Out of all the bazillion interesting side characters he's written in countless novels since, what was it about the failed priest that he felt so compelled to bring him into this magnum opus, to the extent of making him a fully fledged quartet member? Was King himself suffering from a case of nostalgia, looking back over his career and wondering what if? He sort of preempted Callahan's return as an offhand remark in an afterword to an early Dark Tower novel. Did he feel a sense of obligation to that? Yeah. Again, I think my idea here was that, like, maybe he literally always, ever since writing Salem's Lot, was like, oh man, I didn't wrap that up. There was no closure there, and then it nagged at him, and then he saw an opportunity to close the loop.
Yeah, I agree with that. I also do think that as King went through recovery and got sober, I do think there was some understanding of alcoholism that he gained throughout the course of his life that probably bugged him a little bit when looking back at how he depicted it with Father Callahan. And I think the opportunity to kind of correct that was probably very tempting for him. So I think there was a lot of dangling threads there, and there was some evolution as a writer. And I do think, just generally, he wrote the book at a time where he thought he was going to die, and he's looking back at his entire career, and the Dark Tower becomes a story about Stephen King's career. And so when you're looking back at your entire career, you look to the beginning of it. And as we said when we started this book, while Carrie is his first novel, Salem's Lot is truly like the first Stephen King story. Like, it is the one that establishes so many of King's central Kingisms. And so it makes sense that that's the one he looks back at first. And then when you look at this story, as I think you and I realize, when you look at the story and say, okay, I want to do some more stuff with it, there's not that many options outside Father Callahan. Like, Ben Mears, what are you going to do with Ben Mears? Like, what is there left with him? There was not much there to begin with. Father Callahan is really the only choice you have. If you say, I want to take a character from the story and evolve him and say something with his growth and change, there's no one else.
Yeah, you can imagine that maybe he even considered Ben Mears as an option, but it actually seems kind of obvious. Like, Callahan is the one with obviously literally just put on a bus.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, what next then?
Mm-hmm. All right, next we have Walkin' Dude 22, who says, it seems to me that King's early work consisted of systematic exploration of horror genre tropes while honing the author's skills. He goes through numerous types of monster. Ultimately, there are only two. One, things that kill us, and two, things that eat us. Breaking these two types down further, King uses his storytelling style to examine witches, maniacs, vampires, werewolves, ghosts. What is your favorite type of monster, and why? Matt, what's your favorite type of monster?
Aliens.
Aliens?
No,
So not any of the ones listed here.
I mean, it's interesting because I don't really think that much about vampires or werewolves. Like, I'm just not scared of those things. Mm-hmm. Ghosts are kind of scary. Ghosts are kind of a scary idea, to me. I mean, if I'm picking from this list, I would pick ghosts.
Stop stealing my answer, man. That was what I was going to pick.
Well, I mean, aliens is actually the thing that I wanted to say, because it's like there's something about the, like, unknowability of it and the potential to be very weird but yeah, you talk about ghosts though.
Yeah, I mean, I don't believe that ghosts exist, but I do find them extremely creepy to think about. Like, just the stories that scare me the most tend to be ghost stories. I also I think a younger Scott, witches would have been my answer to this, because witches used to scare the crap out of me. Ever since I saw that Roald Dahl adaptation movie Witches, where they turned the kids into mice, that as a young boy, that creeped the shit out of me, and I was terrified of scary witch women for a long, long time.
Yes. Yes, that movie is should be rated PG-13. Yeah, that's a good one. I mean, I think the thing about ghosts for me is like they're not you can't really do anything about ghosts. Like vampires and werewolves have weaknesses. Ghosts are just like, they're just there in your house. And
the best you can hope for is that you put them to rest. But even sometimes that's not what you're supposed to do.
Yeah. Yeah. You weren't supposed to help her.
Related to that statement, Walking Dude's other question is, should we get Gore Verbinski to direct a series of Dark Tower films, Matt?
Obviously, yes. Because he should direct everything.
I mean, so for those that don't know, our other podcast, Doofcast, we're doing a series on Gore Verbinski in which we're watching all his films and kind of deconstructing the director, what makes him tick. He's become Matt's favorite director over the course of this project. And so Matt's obviously going to give a yes answer to that. Yeah. I'm not so sure. I mean, in the one hand, he does Big very, very good. I just don't know if I think like he's the right man for the job.
So I was sort of selling the Dark Tower to a friend today, and what I said was kind of the first half of the Dark Tower is extremely fun. It's like the most fun you can get in novel form for my money. But then like the second half of the Dark Tower, he actually shifts in terms of what he's doing, what themes he's approaching, what he's trying to do, the kind of writer that he is. He's gotten older. We talked about this plenty. And so what I kind of want to say is like, I think Verbinski would be a great director for like Drawing of the Three. Not necessarily the right director for the Dark Tower, the novel.
I could see that. I'm with you now. Yeah. Let's get Verbinski to direct the first one.
Yeah.
Which would be Drawing of the Three. Yeah. Let's do it. Let's call him up. You got his number?
No, sorry. All right. Next question. Complicated 9519 says, my question is your thoughts on the two characters Van Helsing and Dracula, and how do you compare them to their counterparts in Salem's Lot? Well, this will be a fast one for me because I haven't read Dracula.
Yeah. So, I mean, Van Helsing, I think Complicated says Van Helsing's closest counterpoint would be Jimmy Cody, but I think textually in the book, it's supposed to be Matt Burke in that he's kind of the one that providing the information, which Van Helsing's role in Dracula is to kind of come in and be like, here's my theory. It's vampires, and no one believes him at first. And then his theory is proved correctly. And then they're like constantly turning to him to be the one that tells them what to do and how to do it. I think those characters are very similar. I do not think that Dracula and Barlow are actually that similar. I almost want to say that I think Barlow is a more menacing presence where like, and I think it has to do with the goal of the two different books in which I think a lot of what Dracula is trying to do is show the way that evil can be defeated successfully. Like they win at the end of Dracula. Like they scare Dracula away from London. He flees back to Transylvania. They follow him there and they kill him. I think even before he gets back to his castle, they kill him. And like it's very effective. Like they're very effective at stopping Dracula. And they save Mia and everyone's happy. Hooray. I think I don't want to be mean about it, but I think Bram Stoker's Dracula is kind of lame-o. Like he just doesn't do very much. You know, it's funny though, because I watched the movie Bram Stoker's Dracula after I finished reading the book, and I just forgot how fucking buck wild that movie is. Have you seen that one?
It is an amazing film. Yes. I wanted to actually ask because in the film, Dracula is almost a tragic figure. Is that stuff in the book?
No, not really. I think it's like broadly in the book, but no. Like the movie is doing a lot.
You know,
It's doing a lot of crazy shit.
Shit where he's wearing the armor that looks like musculature in like, yeah, it's totally wild.
Yeah. Well, and I think in the movie, the character of Mina is like a descendant of Dracula's lost love, and that's why he's so fascinated with her, because they look the same, played by Winona Ryder. I don't think that's in the book. I just read this book recently, and I don't remember that being in the book, so I guess it's not in the book.
Fair enough.
But yeah, like in the movie, I forgot how buck wild the beginning of this movie was, where he just like gets really mad at God and just like throws a sword at the altar and it starts bleeding, and he's like, fuck it, yeah, I'm gonna drink this now, and that's how he becomes a vampire.
Yeah. No, it's pretty awesome. Yeah, it's pretty metal, actually.
It's fucking wild. It's fucking wild. Who directed that? Oh yeah, it was Coppola. I forgot that. What a movie.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, sorry, we got off track a little bit there. Next we have Sigma, who says, y'all said that the prologue and epilogue are gothic fiction, right? Is this what gothic horror feels like? Because I fucking love the prologue and epilogue, and I'm jonesing for more of the style. Maybe I'll read Dracula, but I have a new nonfiction books I've told myself I'd go through. I don't know. What do you think? Do you think the prologue and epilogue would be considered gothic?
We might have said that. I mean, I don't know if I have a very strong sense of what gothic is exactly. Like, it's kind of a I know it when I see it type of thing. And I know some people are just suckers for gothic. Like, I don't remember who I was talking to recently. Somebody was telling me like, oh, I just love reading gothic novels. They're just my absolute jam. And I was like, that's cool. I didn't know that was anyone's jam, but good for you. That's awesome. I mean, yeah, I don't know. Sigma, why don't you go read a gothic novel and then report back to us and tell us whether you agree that it feels at all like those particular parts of Salem's Lot.
I mean, I think everyone should go read Dracula. I think it's like, I think you kind of like gird yourself whenever you open a book from the 1800s, from the 19th century, right? Because you're like, is this gonna just be a drag to read? And it's really not. It is dripping with style, and it's really good. So you should definitely go read Dracula for sure. It's a lot of fun. Cool. I think you'll enjoy it. Other gothic, I don't know if I described the prologue. I mean, you're right that we probably did say that at one point, and now I'm walking it back a little bit because I don't know. I mean, it is definitely of a different style, and King is trying to do something a little bit different, but I'm not comfortable boldly declaring it gothic.
Yeah, I don't remember. That was so long ago that when we read the first. So yeah, sure. I don't know. It's a good question. Makes me want to be like, okay, let me look up what are the like typical elements that constitute gothic fiction.
I'm so bad at like being able to classify by genre, you know, like when someone asks like, is X Y? I'm like, sure. I'm never quite confident.
Right, me neither. All right, last question from Pear Jane. They say, who is your favorite secondary lot character? Not the quartet, not the villains, not the whole town. Your favorite Stephen King special guest star.
Ooh.
They say that theirs is Mike.
Mike is a good answer.
The good kid groundskeeper.
That's a good answer.
Shoot. Do I have anyone off the top of my head?
I'm going to say it before you say it, because I love my guy Weasel.
Yeah, and I was going to say Eva.
Look, it's a match made in heaven.
Exactly. I love it. Yeah, no, I mean they're just lovable. But both of them are actually. So and they don't particularly let us down in any way. It's just very sad when they bite it. So
you're right. You're totally when they bite it. Is that intentional? What you just did there?
Sure it was.
Mike, the good kid groundskeeper is such a good answer though, because he's great.
Yeah.
And he's one of the first ones that dies. It's very sad.
Yeah.
All right, I think that's going to do it for us this week. Thank you so much for all your questions. Sorry it took a little bit longer to get back to them than normal, but we are back on our normal schedule. Speaking of which, next week we will be watching and talking about the Salem's Lot. I keep calling it a mini. I guess it's technically a miniseries. It premiered on television. It's Salem's Lot the movie, but it's a miniseries. It's the one directed by Tobe Hooper. It came out in 1979.
This will be fun.
It's 2 episodes long, which is, I believe it's 3 hours total. So you've never seen this, of course, Matt. I've seen this a few times, and I'm looking forward to revisiting it with you.
All right. I'm excited.
Yeah, so that's what we're doing next week. And then we will wrap up our Salem's Lot coverage and move on to Insomnia after that. But that's going to do it for us this week.
Yeah, remember, you can reach out to us via email at kingslingerspod@gmail.com or on Twitter at kingslingerspod. And of course, the Reddit r/doofmedia is a great place to hang out and talk about these books.
Yeah, if you are not already subscribed to Kingslingers, we strongly recommend you do so as we move into our new book. You want to make sure you don't miss a single episode. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, YouTube, Google Play, and pretty much anywhere else in the world that you can listen to podcasts.
Yeah, and if you like the Kingslingers or any of our other shows and you want to support us, then please consider donating to our Patreon at patreon.com/doofmedia.
Yes, and we are still, just a quick note, we are still kind of trying to solve the problem of how we're going to handle patrons voting for our short fiction contest. So thank you, all of you who are being so patient about that. It's a problem. We're working on the solution, and we hope to have some news for you guys real soon.
Yeah, just logistics.
Yeah. And if you cannot afford to donate, of course, that is absolutely okay. Thank you to everyone who continues to share the podcast. We saw some people over on Twitter just this week sharing it, and we really do appreciate that. Hello, new people that maybe were just showing the podcast. Hope you're doing well. You can always help us out by leaving a rating and a review on Apple Podcasts. This week's Spotlight review comes from a new Brian, who gives us 5 stars and says, "Great analysis. I've listened to the first episode of several Dark Tower podcasts recently. These guys have the best analysis, in my opinion. I understand the need to avoid spoilers, but I'd love to see one spoiler episode per book that discusses the book in light of the full completed series." That's a good comment, and I think we're going to do that eventually. Right, Matt? I think that's the plan, of doing like a episode per book, full spoilers chat eventually.
I would love to do that. That sounds fun. So yeah, totally.
So yeah, we will definitely, we'll fit that into schedule somewhere. Thank you so much, Anu Brian. And thank you to everyone else who has taken the time to leave those ratings and reviews. As always, they do really, really, really help us.
Yeah.
All right, folks, that is it for this week. We'll see you next week as we get to talk about a movie again. I love talking about movies. We'll see you next week when we talk about Tobe Hooper's Salem's Lot. Long days and pleasant nights.
And you have twice the number.